So today I'm going to be giving a lecture on depression in adolescence to bring awareness to this issue and to hopefully help us identify certain risk factors and different things that we can do to help prevent this and just bring general awareness to it. So some goals and objectives for today is that today we're going to try and understand why depression is important for us to understand at this stage of life, be able to identify symptoms of depression, understand different factors that lead to depression, learn the difference between genders, and find ways to avoid the onset of depression through understanding risk factors. I think these are a few general things that are good for us to kind of understand and good for us to recognize so that we can prevent depression in the future and we can kind of identify when certain depressive factors are entering someone's life. So, why depression and why adolescence? So, although most adolescents move through the period without experiencing major psychological upheaval, this stage of life is the most common time for the first appearance of serious psychological difficulties. The three sets of problems are often associated with adolescence: drug and alcohol use and abuse, delinquency and other externalizing problems, and depression and other internalizing problems. Rapid increases in many of the hormones associated with puberty, such as testosterone, estrogen, and various adrenal androgens, may be associated with increased irritability, impulsivity, aggression, especially in boys, and depression, which is really prevalent in females, especially when the increases take place very early in adolescence. One interpretation of these findings is that it is not so much the absolute increases in these hormones during puberty, but instead their rapid fluctuation early in puberty that may affect adolescents' moods. Although rapid increases in hormones early in puberty are associated with depressed mood in girls, it turns out that stressful life events such as problems in the family, in school, or with friends play a larger role in the development of depression and negative moods than do hormonal changes. Next, I want to talk about some symptoms of depression to hopefully bring awareness in recognizing depression, which can be helpful in helping a friend or even helping yourself. This can help you as an individual understand if you need help, and it can also help you look out for your peers. So there are emotional symptoms such as persistent feelings of sadness, emptiness, or hopelessness. There's irritability or frustration that could even be over very small matters. There could be a loss of interest or pleasure in hobbies and activities that you once enjoyed, and there can be feelings of worthlessness, guilt, or self-blame. So cognitive symptoms include difficulty concentrating, making decisions, or remembering. There are thoughts of death or suicidal attempts. And there are physical symptoms as well, such as fatigue or general lack of energy, even when you have adequate amounts of rest. There could be changes in appetite or weight that can either be eating a little bit too much or too little. And there are sleep disturbances associated with depression, such as insomnia or oversleeping. You may have physical aches or pains, and also headaches, or even digestive issues without a clear physical cause. And then there are also some behavioral symptoms, such as withdrawal from friends and family. There could be decreased productivity or avoiding responsibilities. There could be increased use of substances like alcohol or drugs as a way to cope. So moving on, I want to talk about the importance of sleep in this matter. The amount of sleep adolescents should get each night remains constant at around 9 hours. Research says there is now a consensus among scientists that most teenagers are not getting enough sleep, and that inadequate sleep in adolescence leads to all sorts of problems, including depression, alcohol, tobacco, and illicit drug use, obesity as well. And then many of the negative consequences of sleep deprivation are due to its adverse impact on self control. The good news is that getting just one additional hour of sleep each night has significantly improved adolescents' well beings. Despite many adolescents' belief that catching up on sleep on the weekend will make up for sleep deprivation during the week, this is actually a fallacy. And actually, having markedly different bedtimes on weekends versus weekdays can contribute to further sleep related problems. The best thing teenagers can do to avoid problems waking up on school days is to force themselves to get up at the same time on the weekend as on school days, regardless of how late they have stayed up. And this is something that people don't really generally think is the case, but in actuality, this is what you should be doing. Some of this research comes from Wolfson and Craxton from 1998. So research on boys' pubertal timing has mainly found that early maturing boys feel better about themselves and are more popular than late maturing peers. However, a few studies have found higher rates of depression and anxiety among early maturing boys than their on-time peers and among boys who go through puberty especially rapidly. Interestingly, although all adolescents are adversely affected by being bullied by their peers, the impact of victimization is greater for early maturers, perhaps because being picked on when one is larger than average is all the more embarrassing. However, we don't know the exact cause. Although the emotional effects of early maturation on boys are generally positive, early maturing boys are more likely to be involved in problem behavior than adolescents who are the same age but slower to mature and more likely than their peers to get involved in antisocial and deviant activities. They're also more likely to use drugs and alcohol and engage in other risky activities even as young adults, which can further lead to depression. So in contrast to the generally positive impact that early maturation has on the emotional well-being of boys, even though I talked about a lot about the negatives, in general, it's well known that there are positive impacts on based off early maturation. But in contrast to that, it is well established that early maturing girls have more emotional difficulties than their peers, including poorer self-image and higher rates of depression, anxiety, eating disorders, and panic attacks. And you would think these difficulties have something to do with hormones and the effects of hormones, but they're actually more to do with the ways in which looking different from their peers affects girls' feelings about their appearance and their relationships with other adolescents. It is important that we understand gender differences regarding depression because it allows us to predict vulnerable periods of time and bring awareness of harmful behaviors that can accelerate the onset of depression during this time. Substance use coping is identified as a significant mediator in the relationship between depression and alcohol use. The study linked here has found that individuals who use substances to cope with stress are more likely to experience an escalation in depressive symptoms over time. Specifically, depressive symptoms in adulthood predict an increased tendency to use substances to cope with stress, which in turn leads to higher levels of depression and a greater likelihood of developing a major depressive disorder later in life. The research highlights two key pathways. One, depressive symptoms lead to an increased reliance on substances to cope with stress, which exacerbates depressive symptoms over time. And two, early alcohol use predicts greater substance use coping, which subsequently increases the risk of developing depression and major depressive disorder. Overall, substance use coping is a critical factor that not only links depression and alcohol use, but also serves as a unique predictor of escalating depression across developmental transitions. And this underscores the importance of targeting coping mechanisms in prevention and intervention efforts to reduce the co-occurrence of depression and substance use. So this article linked here right below me explores the hopelessness theory of depression. This theory suggests that individuals with a negative inferential style, so like lifestyle, are more likely to develop hopelessness when they experience negative life events, which in turn leads to depression. This study aimed to test whether hopelessness mediates the relationship between a negative inferential style or lifestyle, negative life events, and the first onset of a major depressive episode, as well as depressive symptoms in adolescence. The study involved around 249 adolescents who were assessed at baseline and followed for around 2.5 years. The researchers used self-report measures and diagnostic interviews to assess their lifestyles, their life events, hopelessness, and depressive symptoms, and a depression diagnosis. The results are interesting as they showed that hopelessness actually mediated the relationship between a negative lifestyle and the first onset of major depressive episodes and depressive symptoms at higher levels of multiple types of negative life events. The finding supports the hopelessness theory of depression, demonstrating that adolescents with a negative cognitive style, people who think negatively, are more likely to experience significant negative life events, and then they are more likely to develop hopelessness, which then leads to the onset of depression. The study highlights the importance of early intervention and prevention strategies to address cognitive vulnerabilities and reduce the risk of depression in adolescents. So to wrap up here, the dangers of depression on the mind, this is the conclusion that we have dangers of depression on the mind and body and their susceptibility in adolescents in developing depression and cognitive disorders. So we have found symptoms to look out for, we found different risk factors to avoid and manage, and we looked at differences between people and gender specifically. And this is my works cited. Thank you for your time and attention.